Hello there. This is Knights of the Nerd Republic, the show your favorite nerd stuff, all things about the galaxy far, far away. Almost completely missed my mouth there. This is going to be a very interesting set of episodes. Alden from Ahch-To Radio and I have teamed up to do a joint TNAP and Ahch-To Radio production. This will be in both podcast feeds, and it will be on the Nerd Academy YouTube channel. We will be discussing the Fandom Menace and how we got here. I'm pretty sure that's going to be the title of this two-parter. And we've worked very hard on this. We've been looking forward to making this. It's a heavy conversation, and I want to make it clear up top that there will be some content warnings, discussions of the alt-right, discussions of harassment, discussions of abuse, discussions of threats in both a physical and sexual nature. It's heavy stuff, and we're going to be dissecting why Star Wars is the breeding ground for the fandom. I don't want to besmirch that amazing movie. Why the Fandom Menace was able to basically use Star Wars as its ground zero, specifically why it is so well catered for it, and problems that this fandom has at its core. I hope you guys find what we do insightful. I hesitate to say enjoy it, because it's heavy stuff. I hope this is meaningful and gets the job done. Of course, we do have words from our lovely sponsors at sundaysbloodymary.com. You guys know the drill. I'm going to keep this one short because this is a heavier topic. sundaysbloodymary.com. Most badass Bloody Mary accoutrement in the galaxy. The spicy mix is my go-to favorite, the award-winning spicy mix, that is. They also have their mild and traditional mixes. They also have garnishes like their rim salt, pickled okra, dilly beans, and asparagus. I love pickled asparagus in my Bloody Mary. And cute merch like their shirts, hat, and shot glasses. So go to sundaysbloodymary.com/shop. Use code TNAP at checkout, and you get 10% off your order, and you help out your favorite nerds while you do it. Be warned, this is going to be a little heavy, and it's also going to be a little weird because Alden and I are basically going to be co-hosting. You know, it's not just he's the second host. He is the second host. He's not just helping me host, like I said. So format's going to be interesting. The subject matter is heavy. For your viewing, here is the Fandom Menace and how we got here.
Hello, my friends. It is Ahch-To, and welcome back to the Knights of the Nerd Republic. You know what to do, and stay profitable.
The Nerd Academy podcast is released weekly at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, available on our website at www.thenerdacademypodcast.com and wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find the Nerd Academy podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also help support the show by going to patreon.com/The Nerd Academy podcast, where every donation allows us to bring you more exciting content every week.
Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to a special presentation of both Ahch-To Radio, a Star Wars podcast, and the Nerd Academy Podcast Network. Now, if you heard Jarod's wonderful intro up top or my intro up top, either way, either edition of this that you are consuming on either of the podcast feeds, because it is a crossover, I would like to once again reiterate that it is going to be a little bit different. We both said that, and we both illustrated that for you, but through the magic of editing, that's in the future. This is in the past. So I'm saying now today, on the day of creation of this project, that it is going to be different from what you expect from both of ours, different in the sense of that I, for my purposes, not interviewing a subject so much as I am unpacking a grand topic with somebody that is so well learned in the field. And then, not to speak for Jarod, but for Jarod's purposes, it's unusual because he's sharing the mic with somebody, whereas he's the main, usually, his main host. And so there's a little bit of a tag team effort going on here. So whether or not you heard the opening intro with Sunday's Bloody Marys, or if you heard my opening intro with our music, whatever it is, the content is going to be the same from this point in. I want to reiterate the content warnings that we both said up top in whatever verbiage we did them. There's going to be topics in this that are not just ideologically uncomfortable, but by the extension of what those ideologies are, include things that are sexually graphic in nature, content and trigger warnings for assault threats, for online language that is just horribly abusive.
And just bigotry
racism.
Is a grand concept.
Yeah. A bigotry on all levels, misogyny on all levels, homophobia on all levels, in terms of what we're going to be unpacking. I do want to throw it to you right up top, Jarod, and address sort of the approach on a pushing this out level, because of course we're doing this because we want to explore it, but we're also getting clicks and listens for our stuff off of it. So I want to put that out there too, in the sense of, I don't know what Jared's going to title his. He doesn't know what I'm going to title mine, because we haven't decided yet. But I want to start this by saying we're not going to be adding people. We're not going to be going after specific people. You all know, if you listen in this space, you know what's up. We're talking about concepts, ideas, how we got here. And that's because, frankly, neither of us, I think, want to get into the bad faith discussion of, are you giving them a platform? Because that's bad too. And Jarod, you can speak to that. How do we have these conversations? Why we need to have these conversations amidst a climate that, frankly, can be kind of cruel to the people that are just trying to unpack it.
Yeah, I think that the desire to not want to give certain figures a platform is noble at its core, and I understand the desire not to want to give voice to bad faith actors. However, there does come a point where you have to talk about them to discuss the problem, and the problem is that Star Wars fandom is a breeding ground for the alt-right, and is very specifically well postured to be invaded by those forces and by people who have the intent of recruiting individuals to the alt-right. I do want to say, actually, I don't want to ape their work for the sake of this article, but this discussion in this podcast. But the Salon.com article by Melanie McFarland that came out last week was, in my opinion, groundbreaking. I was on my way to see Lightyear, and Twitter started, buzzing a bit in my pocket. And I looked at my phone and I saw something. It's like, Salon isn't exactly mainstream, but on that, it's more mainstream than more like nerd based outlets like a comicbook.com or something like that.
Exactly.
That in big capital letters said the Fandom Menace. And it makes me very happy that work like this is out there. It also makes me happy in a very, the people who are under attack getting to speak, and it being a woman behind the keyboard on that, because one of the largest targets of the Fandom Menace, Gamergate type movements typically are, for the most part, women, or their arguments and beliefs are at their core rooted in misogyny and sexism in such a way that maybe even the people saying what they're saying don't realize what they're saying. That's not as an excuse, of course, just to drive home how complex this is and how often don't make my nerdy thing political is one of the most political statements you can ever utter in your life, because of all of the things that you inherently have to assume are or are not political. So yeah, I think this is very important to unpack, and I think that again, for the people listening or watching who are not terminally online like you or I, or for people who are not familiar with the ways that extremism has the metamorphosis that it's gone through in the online era, um, how it has become so incredibly prolific, and how geek culture, nerd culture, fandom culture, gaming culture, whatever you want to call it, whatever thing where like weirdos like to dress up and go watch or play things, like you or I, has become weaponized. It's not talked about. There are, for me personally, it's no secret. I'm a big fan of the work of Robert Evans. I'm a big fan of the work of Knowledge Fight, Innuendo Studios. A lot of people, QAnon Anonymous. I follow a lot of people who follow the crazies on behalf of normal people. All of that in quotes, and extremist movements. And because I'm also so deeply rooted in fandom culture, and I'm also incredibly politically active, I can't not see these like very big concentric circles where the Fandom Menace is overlapping with like actual alt-right movements, and that, much to my disappointment, a lot of those outfits, your QAAs, Knowledge Right, etc., have not called attention to these groups and movements. For example, like the entirety of the Fandom Menace basically got to have a party one night with Alex Jones about a year ago, and everybody went, "Don't look at it, don't talk about it, because this isn't worth talking about." And that deeply upset me because so many wild things were said that night, and we all just pretended it didn't happen, because it's the crazy gay frogs guy talking with the guy who's upset about She-Ra's bust. Clearly this isn't worth discussing, when it is. It's very much worth discussing, because the people who are tuning in to those individuals to hear them complain about space wizards are now hearing about like anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Kabbalah and child sacrifice pedophilia.
Right. And that's not to cut you off, but that's sort of the genesis of this, is that there was a point, some point in the last month, and it was several things, but there was, a little bit of a discussion. There's been a little bit of blowback against people, some of whom we're friends with, where they'll call out X, and then a different party will say exactly what you're describing in terms of, well, don't give it a platform. That's not that's just as bad, but there's sort of a I think that some have embraced the when they go low we go high, almost in the wrong ways.
I agree.
In terms of a way that allows something to fester. Like there's a reason why some of the oldest adages in culture involve like chopping off the fish's head. Like you have to sort of at a certain point stand, and that's sort of what the work we are talking about in these fandoms, whether that's Star Wars, whether that's Marvel, DC, anything huge, Star Trek, which has now come under fire from Fox directly recently. There is a certain disconnect there, and it was something that we talked off air, and that's why we're here, is that I knew that you had this knowledge base of how, in the same way that people become experts on serial killers or on natural disasters or anything like that, you are the person I know that has sort of can turn on the PowerPoint and be like, so this is how we got here. And I thought it was so important to unpack it in a way that we're not getting into anybody's mentions and saying, let's have a scrap. Sometimes I would argue that's necessary. Other times we could take it on different ways. That's the thing. It's all situational. But to really unpack how we got here in phases of which, you and I've talked about that we have for you listeners and viewers today, it was important, I think, to unpack this in a way that was ideological, and to say, frankly, that, like you said, ignoring it comes from a noble place. and I understand you don't want to dignify ridiculousness, which is the shield that someone like an Alex Jones hides behind. And why an event like the event you're referring to got ignored is because it's easy to not dignify ridiculousness. But like you and I've talked about, even early in our friendship, I remember one of the first conversations we had about this topic, where we realized that we agreed on it and could unpack it, is that it's really easy to say that hate groups like the Fandom Menace or the ridiculous, frogs are turning gay, conspiracy alien people are so fringe that they don't matter. But the problem is that when it starts with something as easy to not dignify as raise a Mary Sue, right? Just as a common early modern era buzz term. That was an early, around the time that woke started to bubble, Mary Sue started to bubble. And that was one that they all latched onto. It should be noted, just for those playing at home, popularized by someone who was then outed as a predator. Just throwing that out there. A predator, a misogynist, and an abuser of women happened to have pushed that out there. Am I drawing a line between everyone that's ever said it and that? No, of course not. But just for those playing at home, let's consider our sources. The whole idea of that can be easily pushed back on. You, me, all of our friends, everyone that we love in this space, we can all dunk on and destroy that idea very quickly. But there's some kid out there that saw that tweet or that YouTube video or that whatever, that blog, and has now pondered it and doesn't have anybody around him explaining ideas. And I say him because, frankly, there's it's not holistic. It's not a fact that these are men. But like, if we're being realistic about this, it's the cis heteronormative white archetype that is at the center of this.
These groups target demographics. Demographics is one of the most important things.
Yeah,
to
entirely
these groups.
intentional.
And like you said, and that's another thing with the far right misinformation sphere, is the way that like there is a purification effect that happens, where like you will start with a like wild bombastic idea that gets channeled, that gets like pushed through like the Chan boards, that gets pushed onto the internet, that gets synthesized through like a Newsmax and an OAN, that makes its way into the mainstream of the Fox News.
Exactly.
Where, like, you see where like these ideas get kind of like, okay, we need to calm this down. We need to calm this down. Again, it's the, and I'm going to cite him multiple times and encourage all of you, if you have any interest and want to have more of a comprehensive understanding, the YouTube channel Innuendo Studios. Highly recommend. He has a playlist called the Alt-Right Playbook, where he deconstructs and explains a lot of the rhetorical strategy of the alt-right in all of its forms. You can, and it's one of those things where when you watch this, you will at one point go, "Oh yes, this sounds very Trumpian. This sounds very, I've seen and heard all the debates and all these tactics." And then you'll also realize like there are entire pieces of content made by Fandom Menace thought leaders that are built on these very ideas. So one of his, explainers talking about like the ship of Theseus idea, that kind of like we're gonna take this idea down to its barest bones and then put this out in front of you. Is it the same idea or is it not? That's a different conversation. But there's the synthesis, the synthesis of like far right ideas, and again, like the whole Ray is a Mary Sue thing. You. Not to like start like debunking the straw man that is that dumb opinion, but like, why don't you think that about Luke and Anakin? Why don't you think that about such and such? We're like,
and that's the thing, is that those arguments that you and I can make against it, that theoretical kid who's very not theoretical in a lot of cases and very quite literal, he hears that, and then the algorithm puts a slightly more unhinged thing in his suggestions. And then he thinks, well, if that is that, and if X is Y, then this and this. And then before you realize it, it's no longer about fiction and powers. Before that kid even realizes it. And that's how it works. And that's something that is so key to unpack here, because, the Overton window is constantly shifting in terms of what we accept, you know, at a certain point. And we'll talk about this when we get into the Gates movements, whether that's Gamergate and then Comicsgate, its younger cousin. Really not that much younger, came sort of right after. But it starts with what was their big line? Ethics in gaming journalism. Yeah, if it was ethics in gaming journalism, or if
it shaved 5 years off my life, but
yeah, I know. Oh yeah, we're just gonna be husks by the end of this episode. This is actually our public death. But then another, and then there's that big line. But then any version of I just want to respect the lore. I'm not saying anything. It's just that there weren't black dwarves in the appendices. That's all I'm saying. It's not about all of that becomes the slipperiest of slopes. So that's a lot of what we're going to be unpacking today. And so I asked Jarod, it started with will you come on Ahch-To so I can pick your brain about this? And then Jarod, I realized I should have known this because like I know him, and like I know he's a theater kid. I know he's a big nerd. I know he's a reader. I know all these things. And all these things that should have told me he was going to overachieve. And then he was like, so I've been doing research, and I was thinking we could do a 2-part crossover. And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it.
I was like, okay. I was like, this is a really cool idea. We can do it. Because like you had just come off of like being sick from COVID, and I got locked up in a COVID scare of my own.
Yeah.
Where I like just wasn't at work for 3 days in a row while we were still pondering this. And I was like, well, to like really unpack the Fandom Menace, you really need to understand Gamergate and how that set the stage. And I'm like, while I'm doing the Gamergate stuff, I'm like, wow, like if you really like map this onto like the backlash of the prequels, like this kind of like that. And I ended up like, okay, I need to talk to you because this is going to be too big.
Mm-hmm.
And it is too big. And that's the point. Like you can't have a conversation like this. And like, if your intention is to truly unpack it, you cannot strip it down to just bad takes. Look at this bozo. Like you can. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but a more comprehensive discussion to like really do the, you know, like how I've kind of like titled it in some of my notes, the Fandom Menace and how we got here, of it all, to be like, this is how we got here. This is why Star Wars as a fandom, as like a subculture of the world, primed itself to be invaded by these people.
And to, as you've described it, and I've stolen this from you. So if anyone ever hears me say this, I stole it from Jarod. To be a successful cottage industry, which they are, to be definitively monetarily, in terms of viewership and / ratings, however you want to word that for the internet, victorious. They are winning. In terms of the game they've set. I'm not saying, of course, that they're winning ideologically or culturally. Everyone listening to this knows that in good faith. But in terms of what they want, sponsorships, ads. I mean, I've seen some of the numbers. I can't reveal certain sources, but I've heard things. I know some people that work for some marketing companies that can sort of get that data and things. And a lot of these people, millionaires. Like it's taken off, and to them, that's all they need. You know, it's the next day, it's the next grift. So where does that leave us?
And that's another big thing. Is it talking about the like grifter sphere is kind of its own conversation. Where like you can talk about, you know, such and such publicly claims to hate this movie and built his career on it, but privately has talked about how much they love it. Like that is kind of, as much as I like to pick fights with some of these individuals publicly, is not the point right now. We're talking about the broader movement. And like we might get into specifics of certain individuals just to cite examples, but like this is not meant to be like a specific takedown of any one figurehead. It's the movement and how it metastasized.
Yep, 100%, 100%. So that's extremely important too. And again, that's, I think, is part of it, where it can be satisfying to do what you call like Twitter vigilante antics, which I support. Of like adding somebody. This whole thing is not an of any one thing. It's, if anything, is an ideological it's an ideological thread. You know, we have to pick this apart because people, I think, get, and rightfully so, again, in the same way that you pointed out the nobility of not wanting to fight it. We get it. I also get the fear because you say one thing about X user and all of their reply guys will search their name, and then it becomes you getting attacked at very worst, even doxxed, harassed. So I completely get it, which is why also there's an element of us using our privilege here too.
Exactly.
In terms of being white or white passing guys. That's the huge element we should address here too, which is like we have a pass here that other people don't have.
Exactly. It is so much more dangerous and risky for certain people to try to pick these fights. And I do not begrudge anybody that decision at all. It can again, simply put, it can be dangerous. And yeah, I like we said, we understand the people who don't want to run headlong into something like this, because it is fraught, and to pretend it isn't is also kind of pig-headed in its own way. So yeah, I think we've set the groundwork enough here.
Absolutely. So for those of you that have listened to either of our shows, again, this is going to break from format a little, but it will still have somewhat of an interview element from me to Jarod, but more so in the sense of I compare this off air to I'm going to be a museum tour guide and Jared's going to be the curator. I'm going to walk you through this, and Jared's going to stop and really be able to tell you why the piece is in the museum, what it actually has to do with the whole, how we've decided to lay this out. And we talked about these phases, and in a conversation last night, or at the time of this recording last night, we decided that, and it does sort of lend itself to a progression, because we have these three core sections, and it ended up working out that we both agreed that the oldest should come first.
Which, like you said, you doing you're still doing your interview segment, and in the same way that I pretended to be Knowledge Fight to talk about the Friday night tight stream, this is basically my best attempt at a Behind the Bastards for those of you who are familiar with my work and the people I follow.
So
pretend I'm Robert Evans. I'm not that funny or handsome, but pretend I'm Robert.
Yes, you are so that handsome. The picture we're looking at here is a picture of 20, give or take, years, 20 to 25. Take me back now to, and you're coming off of viewings of many things, one of which is something like People versus George Lucas, which has to do with the 1997 to 2005 Star Wars fandom of special editions up through prequels. Of course, again, a lot of this is going to be Star Wars as the
backdrop,
the wallpaper and backdrop. Yeah, but of course, apply this to anything that you love in the nerd space. Take me back to this first phase, prequel era hate, and how early internet helped us get to this place.
So yeah, I mean, and for people who are not super familiar with these weird extreme online communities and how they mutate and all of that stuff, I think this is a good transition piece, because I don't think that's not true. There are Star Wars fans who, via not being around for it or by virtue of revisionist history, want to disavow and almost disown the nightmare that was post-prequel Star Wars. 100%. But because so many of us are familiar with this era, people our age grew up with people that we love, not necessarily maliciously, but just in the I don't like this movie way, kind of, taking a dump on what we liked.
Your parents, your aunts and uncles, your older siblings, your friends. How many times did you hear that, Jared, growing up? There's 6 of them, but only half of them are good. Those 3 suck. We have the good ones.
When I finished Kenobi with my dad kind of was like, oh yeah, there's Hayden, yay. We're like, no, I agree with him. No, of course not. I love Hayden Christensen. And and he and I had a conversation about that, where he was like, yeah, I didn't like his performance. I said, that's fine. That's another thing that's going to be important here. Criticism of a thing and the extreme, I'm going to attack people over liking the thing.
Yes.
Very different. Yep. Very different. I don't care if you don't like a movie. What I care about is if you attack the people who made it in a very pointedly prejudiced way.
And that's what good faith and bad faith means. Those are both phrases that get thrown around a lot, and not that there's a set definition in terms of fandom. I mean, there are of course definitions that you can look up, but when somebody is complaining, are they complaining because they want to have a conversation, or are they complaining because they have an agenda that begins and ends at the impact of that complaint? That's
Precisely.
bad faith. If somebody says something about, again, like a big example for me lately has been the Rings of Power stuff. So if somebody says oh, well, I didn't like that dwarf character because, well, in the appendices, like it just, that's not what the dwarves look like. Like, that's bad faith, and we know this. And as adults, we need to come to a consensus of like really understanding that it's okay to point stuff out and say that, yeah, that's not legitimate. If you talk about character arcs, if you talk about performance, if you talk about the craft of acting, if you talk about production design, costume, music, any of the things that contribute to art, let's have all the conversations about that, because that's what makes a fandom. But in the same way that we should all, like, you ever have that conversation with a parent or any older person in your life where you're like, Mom, like this such and such coworker who's in their 40s, like they said something so problematic or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then that whole generation that was raised on don't talk about politics and religion at the dinner table, they hit you with, but that's what they believe, and that's what they believe. That has inadvertently bred the ability for bad faith to skirt in at all times, because we have decided that just because somebody has a belief, that belief is valid. We have to fall back on the paradox of intolerance. You are allowed to be intolerant of intolerance, even though that's paradoxical. You have to be able to say, you are entitled to that opinion. It is harmful and it is garbage. You're allowed to have all of that. I would die for the right for free speech. I think not having it is so dangerous. I also think that hate speech should be prosecuted, and some people need to be knocked out for what they say.
I mean, yeah, and again, it's something I've always said. Free speech does not entitle you to not also have somebody use their free speech to come down on you like a stack of bricks rhetorically, because so often those kinds of beliefs are inherently flawed internally. But that's fascism for you sometimes. Because that's the point of fascism as an ideology, something we can't unpack right now. But yeah, so and one of the main, and again, like the big thing I watched was The People versus George Lucas, because it was one of those, like, I lived this era. I don't feel like I need a whole lot of research, but The People versus George Lucas is kind of this like immortalized tome of so much of the like of the hate against the prequel trilogy. And like discussions about it, and like the fan entitlement, and the conversations that like start basically with the special editions, and how the conversations about how Lucas hates us. He's taking away our thing, and that I was so shocked to basically hear that they're taking it away from us by changing it.
And that's the death of the author. Does it belong to the people that consume it? Does it belong to the person that created it? Does it belong to both once it exists in the zeitgeist? And not to cut you off again, but just to preface again on this documentary, would I recommend it like as a piece? No, but would I recommend it as like potentially educational watching from the point of view of what we're doing? I would, and in the sense that People versus George Lucas is an early example that you can track from something like it. This mentality of, we're not trying to hate or be abusive toward George. We're just talking about insert idea. We're just talking about preservation of art. We're just talking about respect for story. We're just talking about anything that they put forth as their thesis, but then their behavior completely torched and destroyed. There's a direct line between that and stuff we'll talk about later of the thesis gets lost so easily.
Oh, it's that, and like the language that's used, like again, the Star Wars fandom has an issue with entitlement. There is an expectation, an undue expectation of the fan of Star Wars to get this like very specific version given to them every time. And I understand that everybody's Star Wars and how they experience it and live it is different. Star Wars is the ultimate. You get what you get out of it, what you put into it. I like, some people come for like the, archetypal myth and the, the metaphor stretched out across the story. Some people come, for lightsaber go burr, everybody's here for something different. Some people come here for this like vast alternative history. I myself am somebody who's like kind of like a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B when it comes to that kind of thing with like what I want from my Star Wars. Yeah. But here, and I pulled a couple choice quotes, where again, heads up, this is where stuff gets really bombastically gross. We're talking about the special editions, talking about the changes they made. They dedicate almost like an entire like 7-minute block just to people arguing about the who shot first thing. And it's just minutia. It's the nitpicking, and the hatred of change and the hatred of difference.
Yeah.
Earmark that. And then you arrive at quotes like, it's almost like a Holocaust denier, but it's a Star Wars denier. The thing, it never happened. It never existed. That's at about the 30-minute mark of the People versus George Lucas.
Remember that so distinctly.
We're like,
you're saying things, and you introduced this section, and the quotes started flooding back to me. That one, the one about, I don't know what you have, but the one about destroying story. Again, I want graphic language, or uncomfortable at the very least. The one who, I don't know if it's in this section, but George Lucas fingered my adolescent youth. Just a lot of just like obscene.
That is the things. Again, I know we've put the content warnings up. I'm just going to reiterate it because it's coming. What you're referring to is the where they closed the documentary with George Lucas raped my childhood.
Yeah.
And like the discussion of like that thing's very existence and like a bunch of people laughing about it. And then this like one guy going, well, George Lucas didn't rape my childhood. I would say that like my childhood kind of like was seduced by George and like consensually agreed to. And then it's like, we're and again, I'm not going to give very many, it was a different time type, excuses here. And like, I'm not going to cover ass for this documentary. It came out in 2011. I think that like there's enough of a, I think it is culturally aware enough to go.
It's very it's very like the height of Family Guy post the Indiana Jones South Park gag, if you can even call it a gag. But it's definitely like guys that are realizing they're turning 40 and are trying to hold on to the edge of the 90s. It that looms over the entire thing.
You're absolutely right, and that comes up not multiple times, but like it kind of segues into the George Lucas raped my childhood thing.
But continue on with your selections, yeah.
But yeah, no, again, these are one of those things that like we all live through all of this, and what I want to call attention to is the language things, like the toxic nostalgia of George Lucas raped my childhood. Or another quote that's like, again, towards the end at about hour and 16 minutes, to to be more into a thing than the last person. This is in like nerd, just with regards to nerd culture. To be more into the thing than the last person, a nerd has to hate it. That's how you know that they love it. We're the terms we're agreeing to, like that's what the Star Wars fandom has decided it's going to be. A group of people who love a franchise so much that they have dedicated half of their personality, half of their time talking about it to, in the most bombastic and uncomfortable way, railing against half of its existence.
And we've heard that memed, and sometimes like it's like laugh through the pain, everyone laugh through the pain. Like you'll see it even said lovingly, like no one hates Star Wars like Star Wars fans, and we all laugh. But the ideological bankruptcy, the moral bankruptcy that comes from accepting that is not only toxic, it's weirdly Stockholmy. It's frankly kind of disturbing. You tie that quote in with the George Lucas poetry slam that they show footage of earlier in the doc, and it's like, what is you're having an actual event where you are taking poetry, a form of expression, and bastardizing it to express that you think that somebody who made the art you love bastardized that art. It is the most cyclical, weird, culty thing. It's just the epitome of strange behavior.
And it's so bizarre. And like, there's one guy who worked for Lucasfilm that they have in the documentary who, I love. He's my favorite part of the documentary because every so often they'll cut to him and he just has this very like boom, 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 like rhetorical style where he's like, what do you mean George Lucas hates you guys? Look at all that he's done for you. Like he's talking about, he's like, oh, he hates the fans. He hates the fans. He lets you re-edit his stuff all the time. He lets you make fan films. He has a competition for you to make fan films. He has his sound effects readily available on the internet for you to use in your little fan films. Get out of here. He's my favorite guy in the whole documentary.
It's the best because it's true. Nobody was as in, and talk about, you talk about revisionist history. I say two things all the time. One, nobody that lived through prequel hate should be saying jack about anything that comes out now aggressively. I'm not saying don't have an opinion. What I am saying is anyone that's in their 20s that dogs on the sequels forgot where they came from. One,
the words fake fan should not leave your lips if you grew up on the prequel trilogy.
Never. You learn nothing from the wars that we lived through. And then two, George Lucas revisionist history. Like I've said, the greatest thing that will ever happen to Kathleen Kennedy in terms of her Star Wars run is when she retires, because whoever comes in next will garner all the heat, and then Kathy will become a misunderstood genius that we always loved. And for the record, you're listening to two Kathleen Kennedy fans who love the modern era.
Yes.
But in the same way that George, like it's always, we live in a "what have you done for me lately" society, and George Lucas selling mythologized him as the old creator, that mythologizing has allowed us to bury this behavior, and it is such a horrid shame that it ever happened to the man who was, as that Lucasfilm employee conveyed, more in on the joke than anyone. James Cameron would never let you make fun of him the way that George Lucas did. Steven Spielberg, maybe a little bit more than James Cameron, but still not as much as George Lucas. George Lucas encouraged Seth MacFarlane. He encouraged Seth Green. He encouraged these guys to go and make Blue Harvest, Robot Chicken. Like, he thought that was so funny.
Well, not even that. Like the one guy in the documentary with Attack of the Clones who calls attention to the moment where like they're walking away and Jar Jar smiles down the barrel of the camera at the audience.
Yeah.
Like who thought that George is in on the joke. He knows how much y'all hate him.
The working title for Attack of the Clones was Jar Jar's Great Adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Jar Jar, like not only is this kind of hate lobbed at George Lucas, this documentary was centered on it. We know what they did to Ahmed Best. Ahmed Best almost killed himself because of this horrible, toxic, abusive behavior. And it was because of the movie. Like, that is what we like. And I get frustrated at the prequel hate and the sequel hate are the same thing opinion. On the surface level, yes, there is that same level of people going ballistic over Space Wizards and telling people to harm themselves and bullying people out of the public sphere over Space Wizards. Sure. The core issue has evolved into something more based in bigotry. And what's important about the prequel era hate is things like the Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd situations and Hayden Christensen, where you have people who are so forced out of their space just on the spec of, I don't like your movie. I hate this movie. I hate this character. I don't like little Anakin. I think he's annoying. I don't like Hayden as Anakin. He's a bad actor. I don't like Jar Jar Binks. He's for kids, which again is one of the most mind-boggling things ever, but yeah, you have these three actors who are like the face of the three victims of the prequel hate. Ahmed Best, pretty much forced out of acting, almost killed himself. Jake Lloyd, bullied out of acting, bullied through school, and all of the psychological harm that is done to an individual that threw him onto hard times, because he was one of the only I can think of child stars who like destabilized, not because they were so indulged by like, oh, Hollywood glitz and all of that, because he was like the first real victim of like a campaign of cyberbullying and real life bullying, because they didn't like the child in a children's movie.
Yep.
And then Hayden Christensen, who is made fun of to high heaven for his performance. And again, this is where like the revisionist history becomes an issue, that we talk about prequel memes and all of that stuff. So many of those prequel memes exist because it's people saying, oh, look how bad this movie is. Look how horribly written this film is.
The fans reclaimed those, but that doesn't mean that their origins, like you see it all the time, especially in the wake of Obi-Wan Kenobi, whether that's prequel memes of like, now when you post a "this is where the fun begins," it's from a place of love. The people that got on the internet and clipped it out did not make it from a place of love. This is outrageous, it's unfair. Any Anakin thing, any prequel thing, in the wake of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I love these posts. I think they're great. I love the spirit. When people say, so glad to see him have this moment because I always loved him. It's like, yes. How old are you? That person will probably answer somewhere between 21 and 29. And it's like, yeah, of course you did, because you were supposed to. But the reclaiming happened because we got older, but it doesn't erase the origins. It doesn't erase the people that, I mean, even people that have nothing but love for Star Wars in their hearts, like Jon Favreau, have admitted to like, it takes work for them to come around on these. And they're the best examples. The worst examples are still out there, and they're making decisions. They're making content. They're either part of the grift or they've gone completely off the deep end.
Well, yeah, and like what you were saying, and again, it's that revisionist history, it's that hypocrisy, and it is, again, to kind of skip to the end here, kind of like behaviors that prime the, I'm not going to use the term toxic, I'm going to say negative Star Wars fan. The negative Star Wars fan, a fan of Star Wars who spends more time talking about the things they dislike than like being excited about Star Wars.
Right.
The way that some of those fans kind of prime themselves to be taken advantage of by the far right, by like fascist recruiters, to pull them all the way down the pipeline. And we'll discuss like the actual like etymology of like the alt-right pipeline and what that means. But that like glossy-eyed like desire for and nostalgia for an era that didn't really exist is one of like the core like needs for fascist ideology to like thrive. And again, I know it sounds wild to talk about, you know, revisionist history with like how much people actually liked a movie or an actor and fascism, but like that's what I'm talking about, that like we as a fandom have a really weird problem where we're primed for it. And you have so many people, some of them really prominent content creators, who will talk about how much they love Hayden, wanted Hayden back, wanted Hayden to do all these things. They're like, we got Hayden and Obi-Wan, we're going to get Hayden and Ahsoka. I want this, I want that. I want to maximize the amount of time I see Hayden Christensen as Anakin freaking Skywalker, are the same people who will say some of the most horrendous things about the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Like the conversations, and again, it was because I was around people who were like old enough to have like opinions I don't agree with about the prequels then and as an adult. You know, the conversations I heard among, you know, my uncles and my dad about like why they don't like Anakin and him being whiny and him being all these things and like whatever. Immediately the sequels come out, I hear people my age at lunch, because The Force Awakens came out while I was a junior in high school. I immediately hear the same things being said about Kylo Ren, and these are all people who ride or die for the prequel trilogy.
Yep.
And I'm just racking my brain. I'm like, y'all complain all the time.
There's no object permanence of their own thoughts and actions. If you can apply object permanence to ideas and to feelings, it's for me, not for thee. It's all those easy encapsulations. But like you said, and I'm fascinated and horrified by the idea that these movements are built on nostalgia for times that never existed. They remember a false 1997 and 2005 where everyone was happy about the return of Star Wars.
Yeah.
Everyone was not.
No.
Everyone was not. In the same way that there was never the idyllic American 50s, there was not some idyllic American late 90s, early 2000s pop culturally. And we sell a lie, and very, very, very few people own up to any of it. Like you will find, like, I will give a shout out to Jennifer Lambda from Force Center, who is one of the only people that knows that they contributed to prequel hate, that owns it, has atoned for it, says it was uncool, and has like completely moved on from it. Like,
Yeah, I
no
mean,
one does that.
I even say, because like I had my like, you know, like one of the funniest things or like not funniest, but like one of the things I like got big laughs out of all my nerd friends in high school is that I ripped Attack of the Clones apart on a regular basis.
Yeah.
You know, like to this day, it is the only Star Wars movie that I'm just kind of like about. I get that people love it, and to this day, you know, like I can criticize it and I can talk about it and I can make fun of it because movies can be made fun of. I will never take it to the place of rah rah Hayden Christensen kill yourself type of thing, because I am not a lunatic. And it's that it is this toxic nostalgia where so many of the people who felt in some weird way violated by the prequel trilogy desire this like reclamation that George Lucas is taking away what he gave to them.
Yeah.
And that the culture is shifting and it's different now, and it's bad because it's different. Again, these are those primers, like that mentality of different equals bad, me no like different is such like it is. You've skipped so many steps for the people who want to infiltrate and kind of twist the minds of those people. Like the weird, like again, this weird entitlement of where they were talking about people who hate these movies, but their walls are covered in like action figures on pegs. They're like, I, the fan, am tired of being exploited. Where it is a very entitled mentality of this thing is meant to work for me. And because I do not like everything about its current state, because it has changed in some way, even if it hasn't changed that much, it's different and therefore bad. And I refute the new thing.
And what does that speak to, right? That speaks to so many of the same insecurities that get preyed upon down the road when it becomes very serious and socially impactful and socially harmful, societally harmful. Because where does that entitlement come from? It comes from the fact that you latched onto this thing and you made it not just a part of what makes you happy, but a part of what makes you feel valid. And when that is threatened is when people become wounded animals backed into a corner. The most vicious, the most afraid. We could go on and on all day. I'm not going to do that about the ironies of how the struggles that these people are really expressing when they talk about their exploitation, or some of the struggles that Star Wars would explain to them if they just listened. But there's a huge entitlement factor wrapped up in an idea of, I need it to be the way it was when I discovered it because I refuse to change. It's a fear of change and also a refusal to open themselves up to change.
Exactly. And again, that is a mentality that is just so plump. Like it's kind of terrifying. Like looking back at this, where I'm, you know, knowing what I know now in the year of 2022, watching this documentary, you know, again with these very specific examples, and I tackle the People versus George Lucas because it is built on it is built on the entitlement of fandom. And we said we weren't going to be trying to at people specifically, but it's a useful example. Creators, I don't even say creators like, it is Doomcock. If you watch his content, and I discovered him around The Rise of Skywalker coming out, his whole bit of without respect we reject, in talking about how until the canon is rectified, until we are culturally given back what belongs to us, we must at every step of the road deny the validity of the new thing. Like there is very Richard Spencery language, very Lauren Southerny language, where like about new things and how they like shatter the canon and all of these things. He so frequently talks about like the cultural importance of things and how by injecting woke SJW politics into it, you've inherently like sullied it. Now, of course, again, we're not going to get into the irony of, return like the Ewoks or the Viet Cong. Like we're not even going to touch that. Like that's that's beside the point. And just one of those things where like save that for when you're arguing with a Doomcock.
Sure. And our combined listenership are the people that know that and do. So
yeah. Exactly. So, but it's stuff like that where that language you see before and there's definitely some political undertones here with like the prequel hate and whatever, but it's not at its core a like refutation of this thing for its quote unquote politics, and it doesn't slowly like the sequel trilogy hate start as like here's this list of like prequel hatey soundy things that by the time we get to The Last Jedi, it is all about it's feminist, it's woke, it's this, it's that. We're like we're attacking it for the women that are in the movie. We're attacking it for all of these reasons. That wasn't here with the prequel era. But the language that's used can slowly metastasize on a cultural level to things like give us our culture back. This very, very nebulous our. I don't know who the in group is, but I certainly know that the out group is meant to be SJWs, whatever the hell that means.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that who's the in group? Undefined. Who are the out group? SJW. What does that mean? Also undefined, because they are applicable to whatever situation.
It's that strategic vagueness that exactly what either of them means, though.
Yes,
but it's malleable situationally.
Of course, and that's we'll get to that in the later section about the Gamergate movement of
another 5 years.
Yeah, the malleability of them being able to say, well, hold on a second, that we're talking about ethics and it's like, but we all know you're not. But you've created enough of a goalpost. The goalpost is moving, but it's inching across the field. What's acceptable, what's considered out of line is all so amorphous. And that's where the danger of this all comes from. And this section, this opening section about those early days, it laid the groundwork in so many fundamentally awful ways. There's so many elements from this prequel era, special editions to prequel era, that have still not been solved. It created obsessions with things like canon that have been weaponized. It created obsessions with things like changes that have been weaponized. Again, these are things that could be their own videos that I'm not going to spend forever unpacking, but you could draw direct lines from the special editions all the way to our current obsession with needing to be insiders and needing to there's a direct line between special edition entitlement and like Snyder Cut stuff. Direct line.
You're absolutely right.
George Lucas introduced people to the process, and that was a double-edged sword because it inspired a generation, but it also made a generation think that they knew better. He was the first person that, not that no one had ever had. You could find behind-the-scenes content back in the day, but you had to be a super nerd. Ask any older nerd in your friend group. How did you learn about special effects back then? It's like You had to go to the library and hope that they had a certain magazine about a certain thing. Like George was the one that opened the door and said, this is ILM. This is what we do. Yes, I'm making changes. I'm going to re-release them. I'm going to give them their own trailer. See it again for the first time. And nowadays, something comes out, Love and Thunder being the most recent example, and people are already, where are the missing scenes? Where are the scenes that I know you shot? And that anger becomes, again, much like a Mary Sue thing, it's things that just seem like it's just a fandom conversation. Just a fandom conversation until it's not, until it becomes the type of entitlement that can be weaponized.
Until it's very much aggressively not. And again, like the proclivity that the Star Wars fandom has to lose its mind all the time. Like it's unparalleled. It's I don't know of another fandom that turns on a dime this quickly all the time.
Yep.
I don't. The only recent comparison is the Snyder Cult stuff.
Yep.
Which, again, the internal politics of Zack Snyder is its own conversation.
Yeah.
Maggie Mayfish did it better than we ever will.
God bless her. Yep.
God bless her indeed. But yeah, I think Alden and I, listener, viewer, whatever, like you understand, like we as a fandom have a problem with not getting what we want. And it predisposed a sense of self-importance, a sense of entitlement, a sense of validity and raging against those who made the thing for you, that will become very important later into this discussion, and about how these things kind of take on a life of their own in the worst way possible.
Yep.
This sets the stage for the next big wave of nerd culture losing its damn mind. Obviously, society kind of, continues past Star Wars. We kind of enter the second dark times. The Star Wars fandom isn't like the biggest thing on the planet these days, but the internet certainly has taken on a life of its own by now. And we get into what is the first real alt-right movement under the guise of nerds doing nerd stuff. We've alluded to Gamergate so far a few times. The next part of this is going to be delving into Gamergate itself. I have a very long timeline written out to kind of like hear because we talk about Gamergate in like kind of like little g Gamergate. Yeah. It's just kind of like shorthand for nerds going crazy and attacking people. But I think going through Gamergate kind of like by the minute is going to be important, because we will see the similarities it has with the prequel backlash and the sequel backlash, and how interaction with these factions online is emulated there as well. And then we can talk about and basically bring it home in part 2 with this is what we learned. So all of that is going to be in part 2.
That'll be part 2. And I will also note, before we jump to our, again, as a co-production, you're going to hear, depending on what edition you're listening to, you'll hear 2 different endings coming up here with 2 different sets of plugs and everything. But I will also note, on that Dark Times note, it made me think it's important to send ourselves back there before we get to part 2. So if you're finishing up part 1 with us, I really want you to imagine post 2005, that decade between 2005 and 2015. I want everyone to really try to get back into it as much as they can, because there's one defining aspect that became the ultimate double-edged sword for that entire 10 years, whether it's things like the birth of the MCU, whether that's things like, we had the birth of Nolan's trilogy in the same year as Revenge of the Sith, but then 2008 Dark Knight, it becomes the biggest thing ever. Nerd television starts to take off. That's the decade when nerds won. The nerd stuff became the dominant force of everything. And that is both the best thing that ever happened for so many of us, but also the breeding ground. The dominance of it, beyond things that were like riding the line of nerd, like Lost and stuff like that. This was when, oh my goodness, a fantasy show is the biggest show on Earth. Oh wow! Oh, suddenly, Star Trek is back. J.J. Abrams brought Star Trek back, and it's huge and it's sexy and everyone loves it. Oh my god, a Batman thing could win Oscars and then does. All of that, bringing everything to the grand stage, is nothing's niche anymore in that decade. Remember that change. Remember how good it felt, and also remember how that goodness correlates with equal badness. Powerful light, powerful dark.
Don't quote that movie; it's political. So yeah, from this point, you'll hear from either me or Alden in the future. So I throw to you, future selves. Hello there, guys. It is Jared from the future again, even further in the future, because you can see that I've changed my shirt since you've last seen me. Yeah, thank you for watching part 1 of our collaborative Fandom Menace analysis. It's a lot, and part 2 is going to be heavier. So again, the word I'm looking for is not enjoy, but I hope that you found part 1 insightful. I hope that you found the discussion meaningful, and that you will be able to and I hope that it equips you to dive into part 2, which will be out not long after you see this, to really get into the meat of why Star Wars fandom, unfortunately, is the breeding ground it is for the worst type of fans. I want to do another thank you to Sunday's Bloody Mary, of course. You guys can find me on Twitter and Instagram at DarkJedi2552, and you can find the Nerd Academy podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and on our website, www.thenerdacademypodcast.com, where, if you're feeling generous, you can donate to our Patreon.
Give me $1.
Feels we're doing the bits right now. Speaking of our Patreon, thank you to our $10 alumnus, Nick Johnson, and to Paco, or the Alex Jones joke.
All right, ladies and gentlemen.
Fuck that guy. And our newest $10 patron, Keandre Lloyd. Thank you very much. For those of you who are listening to this and have no idea what you just heard, that is a video that Keandre shared with us during our Multiverse of Madness live stream review, wherein, upon Andrew Garfield's appearance in Spider-Man No Way Home, the entire theater started screaming like they were weeping and crying because they witnessed something terrible. And then you can see the silhouette of an individual doing a backflip out of excitement. It's quite a funny clip, and I encourage you to watch the video version to get it. So again, thank you to Keandre. By the time you're hearing this, hopefully Anakin Skywalker versus Ahsoka Tano. I'm spoiling the fact that Luke is going to be in the net one after that. Will be out. Stay tuned. Alden and I have a match coming up for Epic Confrontations, the trivia show attached to Star Wars in a Galaxy. So stay tuned for that. Very excited. We are recording our match on Tuesday, July 19th. I'm not sure when Eli is going to air it, but that's when I'm going to be playing Alden. So stay tuned for that. Very excited. So yeah, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out the. Pardon me. Pardon me, part 2. The student store link on our website.
T-public.com.
Great way to support us and get some merch from your favorite nerds while you do it. But with that, thank you all so very much for watching or listening, whichever podcast feed you're turning into. And may the force be with you always. See you all in part 2.